So it's been 7 years, 7 years since the sequel trilogy of Star Wars began with The Force Awakens. So what I'm doing is I want to do a little 3 video series where I look back at the sequel trilogy now, 7 years after Force Awakens, 5 years after Last Jedi, and 3 years after The Rise of Skywalker. And I want to discuss what I think about it now, and I want to go back to that time period. So I want to give y'all kind of a glimpse into what was going on in my life back then and discuss sort of what the problems were. Go ahead and kind of looking at this again because lately I've been looking at these films again and what they did and what they're doing now, and I want to talk all about it. So this is the part one, which is about The Force Awakens. So I want to go all the way back actually to 2012. I remember, I will never forget, I'm at my PC and the news broke. Disney buys Star Wars from Lucasfilm and will begin production on episode 7 soon. I texted a friend of mine who's a big Star Wars fan. He straight up thought I was pranking him because it seems so surreal. After the prequels, George Lucas repeatedly said there's no more movies. I'm done. Maybe somebody else someday can do a side story, but I'm done with the numbered movies. But when Disney bought the franchise for the $4 billion price tag, they did what most of us expected. Begin work on episode 7. Now, I want to tell you, I got into Star Wars when I was 4 years old, and at that time there was no prequels. All we had was the original trilogy and some books and some video games. That's it. It's nowhere near all the Star Wars content that we have now. Things were much simpler. But ever since I was a kid, I wanted to know what happened to Luke Skywalker after Return of the Jedi. I think that was the hook for a lot of fans. What happened to Luke, Han, and Leia, Chewie, and Lando after Return of the Jedi? Did Han and Leia get married? Did Luke start up a new Jedi Academy? And these questions were answered via Timothy Zahn novels and Dark Empire, but they were never portrayed on television. Or, I'm sorry, in movies. They were never actually done in live action. And I knew even as a kid that if episode 7 were to ever happen, it would be massive. And so when it got announced, I was going nuts. 2015 was a very interesting year in my life. It was a transitional year. I'm going to get personal with you guys. A lot of things happened to me in 2015. I was in a relationship and I took it to a new level in 2015. That's my personal life. Also, 2015 is when I started my YouTube channel, Geekdom 101, and I slowly transitioned from being an engineer in IT. I was a security and networking engineer. I transitioned out of that into doing YouTube full time starting in 2015. In 2015, I also had met a bunch of new people through my YouTube channel who stayed being my friends. And I did some traveling. 2015 was a pretty fun year for me, but also a transitional year because I look back on it. There's things I'm not going to talk about here that are private, but I did a lot of traveling in 2015. I met new people. It was sort of a setup year for what my life would become. My life before Geekdom 101, the YouTube channel, was very different than my life after. And I was extremely hyped for The Force Awakens. When that trailer came out of Celebration where Luke's doing the voiceover, the Force is strong in my family. And we see those clips of like Rey and Finn and they hand Leia the lightsaber. And then it ends with Chewie, we're home. Everybody was losing their minds. This was so hyped up. They got Harrison Ford back, Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill. We're going to see the continuation of the story along with some new characters and some new actors. You have to remember, Daisy Ridley was a brand new actor. She had not done movies prior to that. Force Awakens was her debut and she nailed it. But guys, I was so hyped. I was so into this that, part of my original channel was covering Star Wars stuff like news and stuff like that. Some of the leaks that had come out about the film. And going into it, I was really, really excited because I felt like the franchise was in the hands of J.J. Abrams, who I knew was a real Star Wars fan, and I knew he would deliver on the goods, and I trusted him. John Williams came back. This was the legitimate sequel to Star Wars, the sequel to the Star Wars trilogy, built up for like 30-something years. Even before the movie came out, I was hyped. I'll never forget the trailer that came out during Monday Night Football. with, Han Solo being like it's true, all of it, and the music playing and the Millennium Falcon. But I also noticed, I was like, it's interesting that in this movie they're going back to stormtroopers, TIE fighters, Star Destroyers, X-Wings. It wasn't like the prequels that had totally different ships. They were still using the same ships from the OG trilogy, and I quickly figured out the reason they did that is because Disney's goal and J.J. Abrams' goal, as George Lucas said, was to make a retro movie. They were so petrified by the prequels and the response that the prequels got, which, by the way, as we talk about these movies, you'll notice that Force Awakens was really like a reply to the negative publicity from the prequels, and then Last Jedi did that for Force Awakens, and Rise of Skywalker really did that for Last Jedi. And that became a thing that Disney became very reactionary. And at the time, Disney was still in the middle of phase 2 of the MCU, and that was cooking. That was cooking, yo. So there was no reason to doubt Disney at this time. At this time, obviously the world would reveal that that would not be the case. In time, the truth came out. But at the time, I was wondering, why are they using the same equipment? And I just thought, and the reason was because they wanted to go back to what made Star Wars familiar, which is that aesthetic, lightsabers, desert planets, Star Destroyers, etc. And in many ways, these new characters were basically newer versions of characters that we had seen before. Han, Luke, and Leia became Rey, Poe, and Finn. Grand Moff Tarkin became Hux. The Emperor became Snoke. Darth Vader became Kylo Ren. Yoda became Maz Kanata. That's literally what it was. They're basically newer versions of old characters. But I was okay with this because I understood back then that Disney wanted to play it safe and make sure that the first movie in this trilogy really got everybody hooked, and then they could come back with the future films and kind of go in a new direction. That's what I was thinking, and most of us were thinking. If you go back and you look at some of the channels that have been critical of Star Wars, everybody from Matt Jarbo to Geeks and Gamers to, even Dash Star, everybody who's been critical, Star Wars Theory, we were okay with this back then. Yes, it was a retro movie. Yes, it did kind of, in a way it somewhat regressed some of the characters, if you want to put it that way, but we understood why they did it, and that's okay. We wanted this great story. So I'll never forget how hyped I was. When I saw the poster, there were theories about Rey and Kylo being like twins, like Luke and Leia were, like Luke's children or Han and Leia's children, because, if you read the Timothy Zahn novels, you know about Jaina and Jason Solo. So they were kind of borrowing ideas from that, but changing it. And, you see Starkiller Base is the new Death Star. The movie really was a clone of the original trilogy, but again, I was fine with that because the direction made sense from a corporate perspective. And when I went to go see the movie, I'll never forget, I got emotional. I got teary-eyed 3 times during the film. 3 times. You can call me a wuss if you want to, but seeing Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford on screen together again, dude, that was a big deal. Han and Leia was the couple of Star Wars guys. So seeing them on screen together again, dude, was crazy. Just absolutely freaking crazy to see them on screen again. It was great. And even before the film came out, I was all in on Kylo Ren. I bought Kylo Ren action figures. I bought the Kylo Ren toy lightsaber. I know, I'm a grown-ass man. I did it. I won't lie. I bought the Kylo Ren t-shirt. Kylo Ren, I love the idea behind Kylo Ren. He's a Darth Vader fanboy. And of course, it leaked out that he was Han Solo's son. It wasn't like it was a surprise to me in the movie theater. That leaked out early. And I love how he had like kind of a Revan thing going on. So I was in. I was like, okay, these guys know what they're doing. When I went to go see the film, I'll never forget how much I enjoyed it. I actually still feel to this day that The Force Awakens is a very well-made film. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you take away Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, Force Awakens was actually a pretty logical way to start off a new trilogy. You introduce 3 new characters. You have the main character be somewhat of a mystery, her backstory. and you do open up some mystery boxes to get people intrigued. Now, J.J. Abrams has been criticized, and rightfully so, for opening up too many mystery boxes without a conclusion, and that's the big problem. If you are going to write a story and you're going to have mysteries that are going to go through other movies and other material like books and video games, you have to make sure you know what the freaking outcome is. Like, if you have a secret and you're a writer and you're hiding it from your audience, you have to know what that secret is so that it makes sense. And that is the main problem with these movies, which we're going to get to shortly. I'll talk more about that when we get to Last Jedi. But if you look at Force Awakens in a vacuum as a standalone film, yes, it is a soft reboot to A New Hope. Yes, it has a lot of the same story beats as A New Hope, but it's still a well-made film. The effects are beautiful. The way the TIE Fighters and X-Wings looked, I mean, it was just as good, if not better, than in the 80s. The acting, you can't take away the acting, man. John Boyega, Adam Driver, Oscar Isaac, tremendous actors. Harrison Ford. You can't take that away from the movie. And there was fun stuff. It felt like Star Wars. You had the Star Wars type of humor. It was very quick paced. There was just, it was a great, it still is a pretty damn good movie. But here's the problem. Here's the issue. Because of what The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker did, it takes away from the enjoyment of this film. Because when you watch this film, and I rewatched it again a few days ago, when you watch this movie, the things that they set up, could have paid off so well in episodes 8 and 9, and they didn't. Now look, did J.J. Abrams open up too many mystery boxes? Yes. But the problem is that the answers to these boxes in episodes 8 and 9 were not satisfactory. I don't care what Rian Johnson thought. Obviously, he wrote the script for Last Jedi before Force Awakens was even finished. So that right there is evidence there was a problem here. And we found out recently that Bob Iger, when he bought the franchise, was pushing for these movies to come out once every 2 years. It was a new Star Wars film every year. Remember, they had Rogue One and Solo in between them. And that's because he wanted to make his money back, and that was a huge mistake. Star Wars has always had 3-year gaps. The old trilogy, the prequel trilogy. Gives them plenty of time to make these movies. Instead, you're kind of being rushed, which is a big problem, and that is Disney's fault. You can't blame Rian Johnson or JJ for that, but they definitely deserve the blame for other things, which I'm going to get to in this series. But what I want to talk about real quick is how Rian Johnson was saying that, he felt like Rey being a nobody was the right move. Now, we'll talk more about that in Last Jedi, but if you watch Force Awakens, you can't tell me that wasn't the original plan, because it wasn't. That was not the original plan. They have so many clues in Force Awakens, literally like 12, that point to Rey being somebody special. Rian Johnson didn't think so. JJ reversed that in Rise of Skywalker, but you could tell that they were really pushing the Rey mystery stuff more than anything, and you knew she had some kind of secret power or some kind of secret past. Now, Finn's a character who I thought was also had tons of potential. We've never seen a stormtrooper go from being a stormtrooper to turn to the light side, and it was teased in Force Awakens he would eventually become a Jedi. And I thought his arc would be that slowly but surely, by the time we get to episode 9, he would at least decide to become a Jedi trainee under Rey or under whoever Jedi Master was around, Luke or whoever, and that would have been sort of the character's arc. Instead, that's not what happened. We'll talk more about that in the Last Jedi video. But without question, having a stormtrooper go from leaving the First Order to becoming a Jedi, that's a great story. That's never been done before in any of the movies. That's a great idea. And ultimately, looking back on the sequel trilogy, I think I would have probably preferred if they did go in a different direction. Maybe not one quite as abstract. That was what George wanted, even though there were some good ideas there from George Lucas. Interesting ones. I would have probably preferred a bit of a different direction. But what they set up in the movie, I think, was still pretty valid, and it definitely got people interested. Without question, it did. I feel like Force Awakens was probably more impactful than The Phantom Menace because of the fact that we had the internet, YouTube, we had, Twitter, we had Reddit now, and there were discussions about Star Wars all over the web. You guys got to remember, from 2015 till Last Jedi, the speculation was up. Who was Snoke? How did Maz Kanata get Luke's lightsaber? Where's Luke been? Why is he away? What happened to the Jedi? Why did, Ben turn? How did Han and Leia lose him? Who is Rey? All these mystery questions. And also, Another big problem that they had with Force Awakens, looking back on it now, is that they didn't really explain what happened in between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens. This is actually a problem that people don't ever talk about, because I think either A, you're in the bubble in Star Wars and you know the answer is, oh, you got to read the Aftermath books. Yeah, but the other answer, which is B, is you're a casual fan who doesn't have time to read those books and doesn't care. But me as a Star Wars fan, I had to explain to a lot of my friends, including my girlfriend's parents and things like that. I had to explain to them like how the First Order came to pass. I had to explain the whole thing with Leia and the New Republic. They didn't really explain anything in this movie. Like when you see Hosni and Prime get blown up by Starkiller Base, they don't really tell you that Hosni and Prime is the center of the Republic. And this idea that the Republic de-armed and only had one fleet, that's so unrealistic and dumb. So there was a lot of dumb ideas. There were good ideas and dumb ideas, but I still feel like even with the dumb ideas, a good writer could have taken these dumb ideas and written them out better. And I still feel that way. I still feel that if you take The Force Awakens and you write a different Episode 8 and a different Episode 9, you could have had a hell of a saga and answered these questions and had them be satisfactory. And then the idea, if you do this right, is you create this awesome story, and then the story's so good, you go back to Force Awakens and you see the context and you recontextualize everything. So like, you get the answer to the mystery boxes in 8 and 9, then you go back and watch the entire trilogy and you see kind of the foreshadowing. You know, Lucas did this with the prequels a little bit. And that's not what happened. What wound up happening was 8 and 9 blew it when it came to following up Force Awakens. Force Awakens is still the best of the sequel movies, and because of that, it makes Force Awakens not as good. You know, it literally does, because Force Awakens relies so much on setting things up for the trilogy. A lot of this is what the movie does. It introduces new characters, brings back old ones, but ultimately it sets up an upcoming big battle between the Resistance/Republic and the First Order that we thought was going to sort of lead us to new planets and new sort of ideas that were still in line with what Star Wars was. But the biggest mistake they made here is, in my opinion, is they didn't understand, and I'm talking about Disney and everybody else, they did not understand really the themes of what Star Wars was. They saw the original trilogy and tried to mimic it and do things it did without really understanding the roots of Star Wars, without really getting that it's from Kurosawa, without really making it a samurai story, without really showing the respect necessary to the original cast. I think most fans wanted to see Han, Luke, and Leia go on one more adventure, even if it was just Episode 7 and Episode 8 and 9 focused on the new cast. Even if it was just this movie, people wanted to see the old cast back together for one more ride. Or you could have made the entirety of 7, 8, and 9. Obviously, Carrie Fisher's passing may have changed this, but you could have planned it to where it was their last adventure, and then Rey becomes the new main character in 9, and then with 10, 11, and 12, you could have continued the story. There's lots of things they could have done. But I vividly remember the hype going into Force Awakens and coming out of it. I saw the movie in theaters like 5 times. I'll never forget, at the end of Force Awakens, when Rey hands Luke the lightsaber, Luke Skywalker is my favorite fictional character of all time. I don't know if y'all know that, but Luke Skywalker is my favorite character. Seeing Mark Hamill, I love Mark Hamill, seeing Mark Hamill there, looking at the lightsaber as old Luke, the ancient Jedi Master, now in the Yoda role, seeing that gave me goosebumps to the point where when the movie ended and there was credits rolling, I froze in my seat. My girl was like, Danny, are you awake, Danny? And I was just staring at the screen because I was mesmerized at the fact that after all these years, I finally saw my hero Luke Skywalker in a Star Wars movie once again. That was a big fucking deal for me. When we discussed Last Jedi, I'll talk about that movie experience. But I'll never forget this. So I went to go see it opening night at 7. I come home, And literally the next day at 10 a.m., I go see it again. There was an impromptu showing at a local movie theater near my house, not the same one I saw opening night. Impromptu showing near my house, and I just went in there and it was packed. So I saw the movie like twice within like 12 hours because I was so mesmerized by it. I'm studying the film, looking at the clues, looking at how awesome Snoke was. You know, if this girl is what you say, bring her to me. Same thing with Kylo Ren. What girl? There's so many clues about who Rey is. She wasn't just nobody. Or was she? We'll talk more about that in the next movie. But there was so much going into this. I had discussions. I started meeting other Star Wars content creators, like Star Wars Explained. And Dash became a very good friend of mine. Dash Star, now Lore Star. Prince, a.k.a. Urban Acolyte. I made friends. Stupendous Wave. I made friends with all the Star Wars content creators and just talked to them all the time about Star Wars. Going into 2016 and 2017 before Last Jedi. That was the peak time for Star Wars popularity, and it's all because of Force Awakens. So you can't deny that. It's a well-made film, but ultimately it does have a ton of flaws. And I think the flaws are that it really didn't do anything new. It didn't really do a lot of world building the way I wanted it to. And it had way too many mystery boxes that, while they could have been solved and done well, they weren't. There wasn't that much lore. There wasn't anything that was really exploring new territory or giving us more information about the Force. You know, I remember there were all these like leaks that wound up not being true about how the film opens with Luke's hand from Empire floating in space, and that the villains wanted to clone the hand. There was all kinds of like, who are the Knights of Ren? What was that flashback that Rey had about? Like, what is Rey's connection to Kylo prior to this movie? I remember I theorized that Rey was Luke's daughter who had her mind wiped by Luke to protect her from Kylo Ren. Like, there was a lot of cool freaking ideas. And when I say her mind wiped, I mean like temporarily shut off, not like totally wiped. And that in episode 8 or 9, she would have got her memories back. That would have been a great moment for her. And it would have at least explained why the Force was so natural to her. Better than being a Palpatine. Like, there were just so many theories, man. And we talked about this so much. I loved Kylo Ren. I loved Adam Driver's performance. The opening scene, man, with freaking Lor San Tekka, a.k.a. Max von Sydow, bro. The First Order rose from the dark side. You did not. I'll show you the dark side. You will try, but you cannot escape your family. You're so right. Just everything about Kylo coming out of the ship. You know, when they took Rey along and Finn screaming Rey and the music's playing. I love John Williams' Rey theme. You see her in the desert rummaging through like old, you know, Star Destroyers that have been destroyed in the Battle of Jakku, which was not explained in the movie. I can't imagine how confusing it was for the casuals, not even knowing what the hell happened. Like, there was so much stuff that happened in between Jedi and Force Awakens that it could have been its own movie. It could have been its own movie. And we're seeing some of it now in Mandalorian, but so much happened with the overall government system and the Battle of Jakku and what actually happened between the Empire and the Republic. There's so many things going on that were never covered, that would have been covered, should have been covered, but they weren't. And the movie ultimately became this big sort of copycat film of the original trilogy, which again, at the time I felt was the right move to kind of get away from the prequels. But now looking back on it, because of the fact that the execution of the successive films did not live up to The Force Awakens and what they did with it, it hurts The Force Awakens. It takes away from the movie, because when I'm watching it now and I see her meet Luke, I know he's going to throw a lightsaber away and become a reject bum, you know, miserable person. I know that she's a Palpatine, which is horrible. Like, the Knights of Ren do nothing, even though they had one scene in Force Awakens where they look cool. Like, there's just so much missed potential. I think they introduced too many new characters. Captain Phasma was like the new Boba Fett, kind of, sort of. Wasted character. Hux, great in this movie. The speech he made to destroy Hosnian Prime was amazing. But again, wasted character. He became a joke in the next one. Snoke, all the mysteries behind him. Is it Plagueis? Is it an ancient Sith Lord? Is it a Dark Jedi? Is it the Prime Jedi? Like, who is this guy? Is it a reincarnation of Darth Bane? All these theories. He was just a guy. And then, Palpatine artificially made him a clone. Okay, whatever. And cloning created him in the laboratory. Test tube baby. Horrible. Just terrible. And they had enough intrigue. There was so much intrigue to start off the sequel trilogy that I remember talking to some friends thinking, you know what? If they nail this, this could be as good as the original trilogy. I said that, which is a dumb thing to say. Don't blame me for that, but I did say that to one of my friends. But I did believe that if they wrote a great story, it could have at least come close. You know what I mean? And been a great trilogy. But that just didn't happen. Ultimately, the sequel trilogy wound up being a horrible trilogy. And even if you like Last Jedi, or even if you like Rise of Skywalker, it doesn't work as a trilogy. Separate films, sure, if you want to say that. Doesn't work. Force Awakens, though, it's sad. When I watch this movie now, it's actually sad because not only do I have a lot of nostalgia for that time period, how awesome the theories were, what we all thought, watching Rebels and seeing how that would tie in, and The Mandalorian was right around the corner. You know, I think that was a couple years away, but I know that there were rumors about doing like a Boba Fett show, which is what Jon Favreau wanted, the Ben Kenobi stuff that wound up happening earlier this year. There was a lot of talk about what they were doing, you know, Rogue One. Remember, Kenobi, a Star Wars story, was supposed to be a movie. Don't forget that. Then it became a Disney Plus show. But the point is that everything seemed fine. And then it just went to shit. So it's a very hard movie to watch because I appreciate the cinematography. Abrams knows how to set up shots and work with camera angles. He's good at that. He's not a very good writer. And Lawrence Kasdan co-wrote Force Awakens, and I'm not even sure what he had planned. I would love it if somebody would have interviewed him and asked him, okay, what did you want to do with Kylo and Snoke and Rey? Because really, I think he was the prime writer. You know, he wrote Empire and Jedi. So I think that he was the guy who really, like, that's what I think makes this movie good and fun, is that he's the writer. That's why it feels so much like the old movies. But then they just shit the bed. Ultimately, the main problem here, which has been discussed to death, is that they had no plan. And I'm not saying you have to have scene by scene everything mapped out, but you have to have answers to your mystery box before you open them. You have to know who Snoke is. You have to know who Rey is and her connection, and have notes and give it to the next filmmaker and say, okay, make the movie, but remember, this is the direction we're going in. Rian Johnson could have looked at that and been like, okay, I'm going to make a movie, good or bad or indifferent, I'm going to make a movie and not break these rules. And ultimately keep it a secret. You know, what is the big reveal? Who is Rey? All that stuff. But they did it without even knowing and passed the baton over to Rian. And it's like, dude, like, they opened up these mysteries without even knowing what they were going to do. And that is bad leadership. That's Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy not having a clue what to do, trying to rush to make their money back, not realizing that they actually wound up hurting it. To this day, ladies and gentlemen, I feel like Star Wars sequel trilogy is legitimately the biggest, I think, and you know what? Not I think, I know. This is objective. Prior to the MCU, listen to me, Star Wars was the biggest film franchise ever. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, all great, but Star Wars was a different level, right? The biggest film franchise of all time, pre-Marvel. And it's easily the biggest wasted opportunity in the history of cinema. This was a wasted opportunity. And the fact that Carrie Fisher passed away before even having a scene with Luke and Han together, we never saw that. We never saw the finale with her. Like, can you imagine, you know, how much more it would have probably hurt if, or not necessarily hurt, but like, can you imagine how it would have been if this trilogy was moving in a good direction with her there and then she dies? Like, it may have been actually more tragic. But her last movie she did, not including Rise of Skywalker, because that's archival footage, is The Last Jedi. And that's like, damn, that's the last movie you did? What a mess. But I do feel like, you know, people nitpicked this film and I defended it, but their nitpicks wound up making sense when the trilogy came out. Yes, Rey was too overpowered. I don't care if she's a Palpatine. You have to train. Luke was Anakin's son, the chosen one's son. He had to train. The Mary Sue-ness came out in the next movie, even more so. And Finn went nowhere, even though he seemed to have an arc. Finn and Poe had like arcs in Last Jedi that kind of repeated what they did in Force Awakens, but I'll talk more about that in that video. So, Force Awakens, man, a hard movie to watch because whenever I do, I think back about my life back then and get kind of emotional because that girl that I was with, I'm not with her anymore, and we had a lot of memories. We saw a lot of Marvel movies together, a lot of theatrical films, and including Star Wars. And I was so hyped, so excited for Kylo Ren and this new trilogy and where they were going to go. And Disney just wanted to milk as much money as they could out of the fans by not telling us everything and making us buy more books and all that nonsense they always do. And they had no direction. And you can't do that. When you have a franchise as big as Star Wars, you can't freaking mess it up. You can't. You can't. That's the biggest mistake. They did not understand how much Star Wars meant to people. They should have really sat down before putting out the trilogy, not rushed in and said, okay, what story do we want to tell, and how do we tell it and show respect to the old characters while introducing new characters? They failed to do that. And to me, it's the biggest wasted opportunity and biggest blunder in the history of cinema, bar none. So Force Awakens, still a well-made film, but it represents hype that's no longer there because the outcome did not match it. So the next video in this series will be The Last Jedi, and I have a lot to say about that too. But go back and think about what your life was like in 2015, 7 years ago, man. Oh my God, things were different. I didn't even live here. Like, everything was different. What do you think? Let me know, and I'll see you on the next one.